32 years of comfortable breathing. And then, like a tooth cracking on a stone, Sentaro realized he was dying. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. The thought lodged in his mind like a splinter he couldn't dig out. He sat in his inherited estate, surrounded by the silence money buys, and felt his own heartbeat counting down. Each pulse whispered, less, less, less. He touched his face in the mirror, watching his fingers tremble against skin that would eventually rot. I should like to live, he whispered to the glass, until I am 500, 600, until the mountains crumble. He became a scholar of desperation. Sentaro devoured scrolls like a man starving, tracing the lives of those who had cheated the grave. The princess of Yamato, 5 centuries of breath. The ancient emperors who ruled for millennia. Their stories were seductive poison, sweet on his tongue. He stopped sleeping, afraid that closing his eyes was practice for the final close. In the yellow lamplight, his eyes grew hollow as he copied diagrams of longevity, charts of frugal living, maps to immortality. If they found it, he muttered, ink staining his fingers, then so can I. Death is merely a habit I have not yet broken. But the greatest cautionary tale he found was Shin no Shiko, the emperor who built walls against barbarians but couldn't wall out time. Sentaro read how the emperor would wake screaming, his silken sheets soaked with the sweat of eternity's fear. Despite the gold, despite the power, the emperor saw worms in every peach, coffins in every carriage. I'm Shin no Shiko, Sentaro realized with a shiver, recognizing the sickness in his own marrow. The need for the elixir became not a desire, but a tumor, growing, consuming reason, eating the man from inside out until only the wish to remain remained. There was Jofuku, the courtier who sailed away with treasures to buy eternity, who never returned but became a god instead of a man. Sentaro visited the shrine where fishermen left offerings for the lost traveler. He stared at the painted waves on the shrine walls, wondering if Jofuku had found the elixir or if the sea had simply swallowed another fool. The silence of the shrine seemed to mock him. You cannot buy forever, the wind whispered through the cedar trees. But Sentaro had money and time, and a desperation that made him very, very dangerous to himself. He abandoned his home like shedding a skin he had outgrown. The relatives waved from the gate, not understanding that they were watching a man become a ghost. Sentaro climbed every peak in the land, his lungs burning, his soft feet bleeding. He searched for hermits in caves that smelled of bat guano and old prayers, finding only wind and his own echo. Where are the immortals? He screamed at the mountains. The mountains answered with avalanches of silence. At night, he curled around his fear like a lover, wondering if he was seeking sages or merely fleeing the shadow that followed his every step. On the 7th mountain, he met a hunter with eyes like bullet holes. Sentaro begged for directions to the hermits. The hunter laughed, a sound like breaking branches. Hermits here. Only the robber king lives in these peaks, with 200 men who'd cut your throat for your boots. The words struck Sentaro like a slap. He had been searching for heaven and found only bandits. In that moment, something crucial shifted in his chest. A gear slipping, a sanity unmoored. He turned toward the sea, toward Jofuku's shrine, toward any madness that promised an end to endings. 7 days and 7 nights he knelt at Jofuku's shrine, neither eating nor drinking, becoming hollow so that the god might fill him. His knees fused to the floorboards, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He prayed until the words lost meaning, until live forever sounded like kill me now in his fevered mind. The candles burned down to stubs, then to pools of wax resembling frozen tears. On the 7th midnight, the air grew thick as honey. The inner shrine door did not open so much as bleed open light, spilling out like a wound in reality. Jofuku emerged not as a man, but as a memory of one, wrapped in clouds that smelled of ozone and regret. You wish to be a hermit? The voice was wind through a crack in a coffin. You must eat pine bark until your blood turns to sap. You must walk on water until your feet forget the earth. You must become pure as gold, empty as a gourd. Jofuku's eyes, if they were eyes bored into Sentaro's soft, greedy soul. You cannot even endure winter without heated socks. You're too full of wanting to ever be empty enough for immortality. But I will grant you mercy, the spirit hissed, and pressed into Sentaro's palm a crane folded from paper that felt like skin. Sit. The crane twitched, then swelled, bones crackling as they elongated, paper wings spreading with the sound of 1,000 books being torn. It grew until it was mouse-sized, its eyes blank ink dots, its beak sharp as a blade. Sentaro climbed onto its back, feeling the rough texture of its neck, like touching a wasp's nest, like straddling a nightmare. The bird launched upward, and Sentaro's stomach stayed behind, his scream swallowed by the rush of impossible flight. They flew for days that might have been years. The crane needed no food, being made of faith and fiber, and neither did Sentaro, suspended in the limbo between worlds. He looked down at the black ocean crawling beneath them, wondering if he was flying toward salvation or simply fleeing in a straight line. The stars above seemed to rotate backward, unwinding time. Sentaro felt his memories beginning to loosen, the faces of his family becoming origami shapes, folding smaller and smaller. He realized with cold clarity that he was no longer exactly human, but something stretched thin between earth and eternity, a smear of wanting across the sky. The island materialized from fog like a tumor growing visible. It was too green, too perfect, the colors saturated to the point of obscenity. When the crane folded itself, bones cracking in reverse and tucked into his pocket like a handkerchief, Sentaro stood on soil that felt spongy, alive, wrong. The buildings were familiar yet twisted, roofs too steep, angles that hurt the eyes. The people moved with the slow grace of deep-sea creatures undulating through streets that smelled of jasmine and decay. Sentaro checked into a hotel where the proprietor smiled with teeth that had never known a dentist's death, perfect and endless. They called it the country of perpetual life, but Sentaro soon learned it was actually the country of perpetual dying. The inhabitants had forgotten what death was, only knowing it as paradise, a door they could not open. "We are so tired," a woman told him, her eyes holding centuries of ennui. "We have eaten every meal 1,000 times. We have loved every lover until love became mathematics." They spoke of death the way Sentaro had once spoken of immortality, with desperate hunger. He realized with creeping horror that he had flown into a mirror, a place where his greatest desire was their greatest curse. The marketplace was an abattoir of inverted appetite. Hawkers cried out selling sweet oblivion, offering globefish that would kill any ordinary man in 3 heartbeats. The wealthy dined on arsenic pastries and belladonna soup, swallowing hope with every poison bite. Sentaro watched a man drink a goblet of strychnine and then complain of indigestion when it only made his skin glow. Spanish flies were served as candy. The restaurant smelled of funeral pyres and coriander. Sentaro's stomach turned, not from disgust, but from the realization that he was the only one eating for survival while they ate for extinction. In the apothecaries, they sold a drug that promised after a mere century of use to possibly gray a single hair or induce a mild stomachache. The price was a kingdom's ransom. Sentaro saw a man 3,000 years old weeping with joy as he examined one silver thread among the black, touching it as if it were spun from God. They craved the corruption of the flesh the way Sentaro had craved its preservation. He began to understand that eternity was not life extended, but life transformed into a cage of crystal, transparent and unbreakable, where even decay became a precious jewel beyond price. For a time, Sentaro was the happiest madman in the asylum. He thrived on their despair, profiting from their endless commerce, laughing at their funerals, which were celebrations of failed suicide. "Fools," he would mutter, gorging on life, to wish for an ending. But slowly, like water-wearing stone, the centuries began their work. 300 years of mornings. 300 years of the same perfect sky. He had exhausted pleasure. He had worn out novelty. He began to envy the man with the gray hair, to crave the variety that only decay provides. The horror bloomed slowly. He was becoming one of them. 300 years. The number became a wall. He lost his fortune 12 times, regained it, lost it again. He married women who forgot his name after the first century. He learned every language, played every game, walked every street until the cobblestones knew his feet better than he knew himself. The sun rose and set like a mechanical toy. Sentaro sat in his unchanging room and felt his mind beginning to fray, threads snapping one by one. He understood now the exquisite luxury of finitude, the mercy of a deadline. Please, he whispered to the walls that never crumbled. Please let me stop. He prayed again, this time not for entrance, but for escape. Jofuku, he croaked, his voice dry from centuries of useless speech. I was wrong. Take me back. Let me die properly. For 7 days he prayed, but this time the god answered immediately. From his pocket, the same pocket, preserved through centuries, the crane emerged, still paper, still impossible. It had waited patient as only objects can be. Sentaro wept as it grew, not from relief, but from the terror of realizing that even after 3 centuries his pocket had not worn out, his clothes had not decayed. He was still preserved, pickled in eternity. The flight home was different. Sentaro looked back at the island shrinking into the fog, and felt not triumph, but a terrible regret. He had left behind a place where death was treasured. He was returning to a world where it was feared. The irony was a blade in his guts. He tried to command the crane to turn back, to let him choose the poison. But the bird flew straight and true, following the command of his earlier prayer. Sentaro realized with sickening clarity that he had become a man who wanted to die, flying toward a life where he would once again fear dying. The paradox was eating him alive. The storm came not from nature, but from narrative justice, hungry and wet. Rain, real rain, acidic and cold, struck the paper wings. Sentaro watched in horror as the crane began to dissolve, its anatomy running like ink, the wings softening, folding, dying. No, he screamed, but paper cannot fly when it is pulp. The crane crumpled, a wet ball of failed origami, and Sentaro fell. The air rushed past him, and for a moment, a perfect suspended moment, he felt the exquisite terror of a real ending approaching. Then the water hit him like a coffin lid slamming shut. The ocean was a graveyard that refused to bury him. Sentaro thrashed in the freezing water, swallowing mouthfuls of brine that should have drowned him, but only preserved him further. He was unsinkable, undrownable, a cork in the wine of the sea. Then he saw the fin. It cut the water with surgical precision, circling, curious. The shark opened its mouth. A dark room where death finally lived, real and toothy and immediate. Sentaro screamed, not in fear, but in desperate welcome. Yes, he shrieked. Yes, eat me, end me, finish the story. He swam toward the teeth, embracing the only honest death he had ever found. He woke screaming, the sound tearing his own throat, his bedroom, his house. The silk sheets were soaked but with sweat, not seawater, or were they? Sentaro sat up, trembling, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, 32 years old. No centuries, no crane, just the dark room and the ticking clock. He laughed, a hysterical bark touching his face, soft, mortal, temporary. The dream had been so precise, so textured, the centuries of boredom etched into his psyche like grooves in a record. He reached for the lamp, and his hand stopped. Something in his pocket was making a sound, a rustling, like paper unfolding. Slowly, with the care of a man defusing a bomb, Sentaro reached into his pocket. His fingers met something dry, crisp, impossible. He pulled it out. In his palm sat a paper crane, slightly damp, slightly crumpled, its eyes 2 black dots that seemed to blink. Outside, the mountains were visible in the dawn light. Mount Fuji, eternal waiting. Sentaro realized with a sinking that had no bottom that he didn't know if he had dreamed the island, or if he was dreaming now, or if the crane would grow again tonight, or if the shark was still swimming somewhere in the dark of his mind, waiting to finish its meal. He was 32 and he would live forever, and he began to scream.